Welcome back to another episode of Tractor Roy. My name is Trent. We're going to be talking a little bit about this Farmall M that we've been working on that we got here. So it looks like we got this tractor January 5th of 2024 this year. We got this and that Farmall C at the same time, and these were tractors number 6 and 7, I think, that we had. The idea with this was just, so that C we got, it was running when we bought it. This one wasn't. The engine was locked up. I mean, for the most part, everything was there. It was missing the starter and needed new tires, but everything else was okay. The engine was stuck. We were hoping that we could get that freed up with the old one. So anyways, this was just kind of like a little, I don't know, a little project, a little hobby that we wanted to do. All the other tractors, let's see, we had my John Deere B that it has some issues I need to work on, but really we didn't have any other project tractors for the most part. All of them are in. So this was bought as a little project, something to do on the side. Haying happened. Like I had to get all my haying stuff, started working on it. So this sat outside. We didn't pull it into the shop here until beginning of April. While this was kind of in here, I was working on this WD-45 that's still sitting here next to it. So this was kind of an off and on thing whenever we had time. Getting my stuff ready for haying was more important. This is just a free time kind of deal. And then there at the beginning of June, we went to that auction and ended up picking up 7 more tractors. So really, if we'd gone to that auction first, we probably wouldn't have bought this one. It needed, just with the engine, it needed a little bit more work than like the ones that we got at that auction. Those ones are way easier to work on. Anyway, so it started off that we were just going to get this thing freed up and drive it, call it good. When we pulled it in here, popped the head off, saw that we weren't going to be able to make that happen. I have that video back on pulling that head off and stuff. So we knew that we were going to have to get a rebuild kit for it. When we pulled the bottom end apart to get those, when we finally got all those pistons pulled out, the connecting rods were bad. Somebody put in connecting rod bearings that were 10 under, but this crankshaft had never been ground. So when I mic'd it, it was still standard size, even after years of wear and whatever. So there's standard bearings that we put back into standard connecting rod bearings. We took out the 10 under, put in standard, and the clearances were just fine. Careful. The plastic gauge showed it was fine. So when we were working on the engine, we jacked up the front end because we were going to replace the front tires. When we did that, we found out the hubs were loose. We're like, okay, whatever. We'll just take that apart, repack the bearings, tighten everything back so that way that wheel is snug. Well, pulled it apart and the inner wheel bearing was bad. This steering pedestal was also leaking. There was just oil that had drained all down the front of this thing. So we thought, hey, what the heck? We got to dig into this. We're going to dig into that too. So we resealed all of the steering pedestal here. We have new inner bearings. The outer bearings were still okay. We reused them. I think we had to replace that inner race too because that inner bearing was bad. We got new seals in there, new gaskets on this hub cover. What else? Then we got 1 brand new tire, 1 good used tire, but new tubes in both of them. And I had to weld a little patch on this rim on one of these sides. This side, yeah. Where that wheel clamp had worn through just because they had ran loose, so it wore a hole through the rim. So welded that up. At some point in this process, we learned this radiator had a hole in it. I'm pretty sure it was like pretty immediate, like maybe right after we pulled this thing in here. Maybe we were working on the front tires. There's a hole right here. And I have the stuff to solder it because I've got a parts M that needs a radiator. So I'll reuse this because there's only that one spot. And I'm into that other one pretty cheap. But this one went ahead with a new radiator. It's not horribly expensive, and just because we're going to go through the effort of rebuilding this thing, we wanted to make sure that our cooling system was going to be up to snuff. So we rebuilt the engine, new sleeves, pistons, new connecting rod bearings. Main bearings were okay. The head was all pretty good. What else did we have to do? Oh, we got new exhaust manifold. That one, the threads in the top were worn. Since you're this far into it, may as well fix that. Had to rebuild the carburetor. That wasn't a big deal. We knew that was going to happen. We still got a new steering wheel for it. On the backside back here, I think their spring was weak and their shock was bad and this front up here had been welded. So the bushings went bad up here, the shock went bad here, and the spring went bad here. So they just welded this seat. Instead of replacing the bushings, they welded it so it was solid. They welded this shock to each other so that way the shock wouldn't compress and expand. And they took a piece of angle iron and welded it here. So this thing was just rock solid. There was absolutely no give to it. So cleaned all that up, cleaned off all the welds. We put a new seat spring, a new shock, and a new pin and rubber bushings for where the seat mounts to the bottom bracket. As far as the swinging drawbar, they had taken this just monstrosity. They had taken 2 drawbars, welded them together because they had bent the original one. And then they had some like gusseting on the top. I don't know what they were pulling with it, but it was heavy. And then they welded it onto the drawbar. Cut that off. We'll find a swinging drawbar from the place that we got this. I'm sure he's got one laying around that we'll be able to replace it. We were pressure washing it because we decided, oh yeah. So as it was at this point, we're like, hey, you know, we may as well try painting it. We're most of the way down. So took it outside, degreased it, pressure washed it to paint. Found out that this axle was leaking, this axle seal. Well, you don't want a seal leaking. We're like, hey, well, this far into it, whatever. So we took the drawbar off, took the wheels off, replaced this one, or we resealed this side. Resealed this side. Had to reseal the PTO because we didn't want to take the top cover off. Threw it all back together, got it painted. There's something else that we did too. Anyways, this is just like a never-ending process. And every way we turned, it seemed like we were going farther and farther into it because we're into it this far already, may as well keep going with it. Before we painted this, we had it temporarily hooked up, had a jumper wire going to the coil, had just a jumper cable to jump the starter. Make sure it ran before we went through the effort of painting it. Make sure that everything was all good to go in here. The distributor was rebuilt also. Timed that, made sure all the valves were adjusted right. We warmed it up so that way we could readjust, or torque down the head, and then readjust the valves before we went through the effort of painting it. So now we just have to throw some stuff back together. We got new parts still that we got to order, some gauges, steering wheel, a few other things like that. But for the most part, we can get this thing fully assembled and put back together. Once it's back together, then we'll go through and do some touch-up painting. There's some spots that I missed. My gun was acting up a couple, mostly on the sheet metal. And then running wrenches and stuff, we're going to chip some of the paint off inevitably. So that's where we're at. Sure didn't think that this project was going to end up the way it did, but it'll be pretty nice when it's done. So thanks for watching Tractor Roy. If you like this, hit that subscribe button, follow along. Hit the thumbs up button, helps the videos out, and throw a comment down below if there's something else you want to see on this thing.